Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Kloster, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation, I'd like to welcome you to the library's virtual author event this evening. Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar original owners of the lands on which our library services operate. We pay respect to Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar elders, past, present, and emerging, and we acknowledge and celebrate First Nation peoples of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge, and story. Wonderful to be here, and tonight we have 25 participants so far, with more coming, and that's just great. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders for everyone. You can participate in this live webinar by clicking on the Q&A button that you'll find at the bottom of your screen and typing in your question or comment. You might need to touch your screen to see the Q&A and the chat functions if you're using an iPad or an iPhone to join us tonight. Also, if you'd like to watch this discussion again or recommend it to friends and family, you can watch it via the library's website from tomorrow. So tonight I have great pleasure, I'm really delighted to introduce internationally best-selling author Paige Toon, who is joining us tonight from the UK. Welcome, Paige.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful to have you. Paige is published in 15 countries with more than 1.5 million copies of her books sold worldwide. And she's been writing books set in sun-drenched locations, including Australia, since 2007. So far, she has released 13 novels and a 3-part spin-off series for young adults, very highly recommended. And The Minute I Saw You, the book that we're focusing on tonight, is her 14th novel. Wonderful to have you, Paige. Thanks for joining us all the way from what looks like the sunny UK.
Yeah, it is absolutely boiling here today. It's like it's a really warm day. You don't often hear that. It's funny, you know, we've had like a bit of a heat wave here, but the last couple of like online virtual library talks that I've done, you know, it's been pouring with rain in the background. It's like, oh, come on, UK, come on, let's show these Aussies it actually does. There is sunshine here.
It is. Well, it's interesting because, of course, your books have often got that kind of sun-drenched element. And The Minute I Saw You is another that I felt had just wonderful scenes in sunshine and punting on the River Cam, and just really, really beautiful. So before we get into the actual book, I think a little background, because Paige, you have this really fascinating background. You're kind of Australian, English, and you have American experience growing up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, well, it was an unusual childhood. My dad was a racing driver. He's retired now. And so we used to spend half the year in Australia, which is where I grew up, and went to school in Australia, and the other half we would spend either in America or the UK, depending on where he was mostly based doing his racing. So, you know, I was actually born in England, but within 3 months I went back to Australia, and then, yeah, like I say, that's where I went to school. And so when we were over in America until I was about, I think it was about 10 or so, you know, half the year there, half the year back in Australia, I only did sort of like a couple of hours of tutoring with mum every day. And then when we moved over to the UK, you know, we started getting a tutor because it was getting a bit more advanced, and she didn't, you know, wanted to sort of wash her hands of it. And started doing sort of, you know, tutor work. So it wasn't until I was, I think, 13 that we went to school full time in the UK. So sort of, I kind of like saying that because a lot of parents at the moment are stressed out about the kids missing 6 months of school or only doing homeschooling for 6 months, you know, during this pandemic. And, you know, honestly, don't worry, like, we all catch up. You know, it's going to be fine.
Well, it obviously did you no harm, because you're not only an international best-selling author, but your books are just beautifully written. So clearly you've had an excellent education, or you're just a genius, naturally gifted.
Definitely not a genius.
Well,
I'd say
it must be the excellent Australian and UK education that you have. So you've obviously travelled a great deal.
Yeah, I've done a lot of traveling, you know, more in my sort of recent, you know, sort of last couple of decades. I think, when we did travel when we were younger, but it used to be more around the racing scene. So, I do remember Japan really vividly. That was where Dad was doing sort of his sports car, championship, and is driving over there. And I remember France very vividly because he raced in 24-hour Le Mans and won the race in '83. And I really remember growing up in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. Like I remember all the cactuses and, all the cacti, I should say, and the mountains and the desert storms and sandstorms and things. And that was like really, really vivid to me. And obviously, I remember growing up in the Adelaide Hills, which was amazing. But in more sort of recent years, living in England, I do a lot of traveling with my family. We go, we've got a camper van and we like driving over to Europe and, sort of traveling around. And I go to a lot of different places for book research or otherwise, go somewhere lovely on holiday and then write about it in the book. So, just picking and choosing really the lovely places to get to. And obviously it's a lot easier over here to go and see a lot of Europe, because you can just nip across, you can drive across if you want to,
Yeah,
sort of drive
yeah, yeah.
on the
Well,
tunnel.
it's interesting because a lot of people don't necessarily do that, but I wondered if that might have been the sort of Australian influence, the idea that you can drive these distances and it's no big deal if you've had
Well,
that sort of
yeah, I did
Australian
used to
influence.
do like quite a few road trips with mum and dad when I was younger. Like they loved it. Like I remember driving across America, and and we loved sort of going on, jumping in the car and driving. And we did drive to Portugal. I remember that as a kid. Sort of driving. Mum and dad have got a holiday house in Portugal, and we drove there once. And so they did. They were always happy to go and do long road trips and things. Us, we were less happy because we didn't used to have DVD players in the back of the car at that point. But our kids love it.
So the writing bug, was that something then from childhood? Like, you in the back of the car writing things, or how
Absolutely, yeah.
did it sort of, was that part of it? Do you think that was an
It was.
influence?
I'm not sure if it was an influence. I think I was just born to write. Like that's something that I've always done ever since I can remember. I used to take myself off up the back of our yard and sort of sit up there and just write poems and songs and stories. And, it's just something that I've kind of always done. Like the first job I ever wanted to do was be an author. I remember that, vividly thinking I'd like to be an author when I grow up. And I was only very young when I had that idea. And sort of later as a sort of teenager when I started reading Dolly magazine was my
Oh,
favourite. I used to get it sent to the UK when we moved here permanently. And I
oh
remember thinking,
wow, really?
yeah, I
That's
remember thinking,
great.
yeah, yeah, it was amazing. It was always my absolute favourite. I was so sad when it closed.
You
But we
worked as
used
an
to,
editor for Heat magazine.
I
So
wrote Heat in the I worked for Heat in the end. So,
yeah,
but that was very much influenced by my reading of Dolly and as a teenager. And I remember thinking, what I'd love to do is, go and work for a magazine first. I'd like to go and work in a magazine, and then when I have kids, and then I can become a mum and an author. you know? I sort of had these grand plans, but it did work
but,
out.
but you've
I was
pulled them all off. I mean, you've actually achieved this. If only we could all do that. Oh, I think I want to do this and that, and hey, now I have. I mean, that's a huge achievement. You
there
know.
was there were a few years there where I didn't think it was going to happen, and I thought it would be my absolute biggest regret. When I was working at Heat and absolutely loving it. I worked did work experience for another magazine in order to get into magazines, and and sort of used to find ways to stay for a little bit longer to make a bit more of an impression. Initially I was only supposed to be there for a week and
Oh
wanted
wow.
wanted to stay like another week. It's like, can I clean out your DVD closet and I'll get everything all nice and tidy. And they're like, yeah, sure, free labor. And but in the end, I stayed at this film magazine, which was called Neon. Back in the day, it's sort of unfortunately closed down now. But they said that I could stay there for a month in total. And when I left, I just begged the editor to think of me if he heard of anything come up. And a couple of months later, got a phone call from one of his editor friends, and this job, a really junior job, had come up at this celebrity magazine called Big, which was a teen magazine, and that was just so much fun. Working for this teen magazine. I was so into sort of like indie and rock music. That's sort of always been my thing, like indie music. But this was all about the boy bands, and I couldn't stand boy bands, and I went to work there. But we used to have like Westlife coming into the into the office, and go to all these showcases where you're introduced to all these new boy bands, and it just became so much fun. Like I love, I actually really like pop music now, and part of that was because of Big. But I went from Big to Heat magazine, which at the time I joined was on the verge of closing down again. Like magazines are, so many of them are closing down now. But at the time, it was selling, I think, 30,000 copies a week, which is not enough for the UK, you know. And when I joined, they changed it, made it more of a celebrity magazine.
Yeah.
And you know, Big Brother came on the TV, and everyone became obsessed by that. And Posh Spice was like a really big thing. And you know, over the time that I worked there for almost 7 years, you know, it went up to selling 600,000 copies a week, and it was just absolutely huge. You know, it would be mentioned in the Houses of Parliament, be mentioned by celebrities on TV. You know, it'd be written into books. You know, it was like this huge sort of, you know, the heat culture. It was, you know, it was fun to be a part of that. And so I was in a really good position as reviews editor to be able to meet people, and you know, and when I eventually was ready to start writing the book that I've been thinking about for years, you know, I was in a really good position to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you sort of count that as your writing apprenticeship, do you think?
I guess so. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you know, working at Heat, because it was a weekly magazine rather than a monthly. You know, I used to be used to working to fairly tight deadlines. You know, you'd
Yeah.
have much tighter deadlines than on a monthly magazine. You know, I know from friends, you'd have like a couple of weeks where no one was really doing very much, and then in the last week they were working to midnight. You know, whereas at Heat, you know, we would always finish work at 6, more or less, because we were just, you know, it was like this fine-tuned, you know, well-oiled, had a great editor, you know, Mark Frith, you know, he was sort of keeping everything, you know, ticking over really well. And so, yeah, it just sort of, it was good writing apprenticeship for sure.
Right. So you obviously learned, I guess, the discipline of writing, because as any author knows, you have to get yourself to the desk and write, you know,
Yeah.
consistently in order to produce the novel. So what is your sort of writing? Do you have a writing discipline?
My main thing is that I start writing in September and I finish by the end of November, you know, and I just find that that time of year is just a really good, solid block of time to really sit down and focus. The kids are back to school after the summer holidays. There's something about writing in the summer, especially, I don't know, there's something about an English summer, which I find really, really hard to write in. And maybe it's hay fever, you know, I always
Yeah.
sort of struggle to concentrate with this time of year. I get really bad hay fever, or it's just quite, I don't know, the heat is quite heavy, you know, and my brain just feels quite foggy. You know, I find it hard to, you know, kind of connect to the characters. Whereas when the air clears and it just becomes like autumn, an English autumn is just beautiful, you know, and it's just, the air becomes a bit more crisp, and there's something about it that I find really so much better for writing in. So, and I think having a bit of a summer break with the kids and everything, I'm just geared up and ready to, you know, get cracking. So, and then I write when they're at school. My first 5 novels, I think it was my first 5 or 6 novels I had to write during baby nap times. You know, like I would only get like an hour or an hour and a half a day, you know, and I would just write as much as I could. So, you know, that was definitely more challenging. But now that they're at school, it's a lot easier.
So you mentioned your characters, and it seemed to me in reading your latest novel, which is this, The Minute I Saw You, which I have to tell you I really enjoyed. I mean, just one of those books that I was trying to work out what it was that I just found so compelling, and just such a rich read, you know.
Mm.
Um, no, it really is. I mean, it's a story about relationships. There's that sort of
Yeah.
that's what I really took from it. And the two main characters, Hannah and Sunny, are just, I've written this down because the reader is drawn into the world that you've created, and yet it's so realistic, because it's sort of, you know, it's all real world. It's set in Cambridge and in Grantchester, just outside of Cambridge, and a lot of just regular stuff happens, you know, go to the pub and have a picnic and go punting, and she works as an optician's, you know, assistant, and it's all these sort of really normal people, but it's got that wonderful element that it's sort of also separate. So there's real emotion, but also comfort in reading it, because you're sort of reading about real people, but it's not like reality TV. It's the joy and the comfort of reading a really well written book.
Oh, thank you.
So I think that I think it's to do with how you have created your characters. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process in that regard?
So, you know, an idea will come to me, and usually it's the idea that comes first rather than the actual character. You know, I think in most cases I'm thinking, oh, there's an idea, and then the characters come after. And, you know, when you spend time researching them, like I think about, in the case of Hannah and Sunny and The Minute I Saw You, I actually only came up with the idea like less than 6 months before I started writing it. That's quite unusual for me. Usually it's a whole year. But when I came up with the idea for Hannah's backstory, which is, there's a bit of a twist and stuff as to what's happened with her.
It's not giving
I
that
came,
away, but
yeah.
very clever, and I thought really out of the box.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, that's nice.
because there are many books that have the kind of hidden past and the thing that has affected someone's life very deeply. And this was a really unusual one and clever, and I thought you handled it really, really well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, so in her case, that was the idea for this book. Everything came from that. Like if it weren't for me getting the idea for that and for her backstory, this book wouldn't have been written this year. I would have saved it for next year because I already had an idea which I was really keen to write. But when that idea came to me after watching a film on a plane on the way to Australia last Easter, and there was this tiny sort of reference to something about, to do with babies that made me think, imagine, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning with jet lag, and it was just sort of thought about this small reference, and I just sort of thought, imagine being that person, that baby, sort of like 30 years on, and what this would be like and what that would be like, and kind of that was where the idea came. I was like, I want to write this, and I had a seed of an idea for the idea of someone who works in opticians and spends their life sort of staring into the eyes of strangers and having a spark happen with one of them, like. This is a thing about getting so close to someone and then, them getting the giggles or, getting, sort of like laughing a little bit and then just being that close to this gorgeous man, So that was another idea, but that wasn't enough for me to want to write the book, like it was Hannah's that kind of made me think.
Yeah.
So I've had some time to think about her and to think about Sunny because in the first chapter, that's what happens. They see each other and they're up close and, and there's this sort of frizzle between them, And then in the next chapter, he's due to come back in and pick up his glasses and she's thinking, oh, something's going to happen here. And when he comes in, he can't meet her eyes and, something bad has happened to him. And so then I had to think about this idea of why can't he meet her eyes? What's happened to him? What's his backstory? And neither of them do long-term relationships. And so all of the research that I had to do for both of them as to what what's happened to them, that had just helped build their story. And that happened well before I started writing it. Although I have to say for Sunny, I didn't fully understand what had happened to him until I was writing it. And that actually unveiled itself to me as I was going along. I was just like, I think this is darker than what I initially, was thinking. And I think the story, both my lightest and my darkest story that I've ever written, it's kind of, the levels of light and dark. I think that you're never too far away from joy, and it's always, because the characters themselves are, they felt so real to me. I think part of it is because I've set them in the place where I live and they do a lot of the things that I do. Yeah. And so I felt very, very connected to the pubs in Grantchester and the canoe and, the sort of cream teas at the orchard, this beautiful sort of English summer setting, that's all, swimming in the river even, that's all stuff that I know and I've done with my family. And so I felt so connected to them before I even started writing their story. And then over the course of doing that research, they become even more real, and then it's just a case of they can't speak fast enough. You're inside their heads and, inside Hannah's head and sort of living through what she's doing. And it just feels very real to me. So if it feels real, like realistic as a character, then that's because it felt really real to me. Like they still feel real to me. Like I haven't let them go. I probably won't.
Well, they are very real. I mean, they're fully fleshed, three-dimensional, living, breathing people that, do really come off the page and they're memorable, I think, which is just a great achievement. That's hard to do actually, but you've achieved it. I also really, actually, I found it so refreshing that, sure, okay, you'll often get books that have, two damaged people and how do they work out their issues and whether or not they come together. But one of the things I found really refreshing here was it was a very slow build because Sunny, and his real name is Jim, and I love the fact that the explanation, because Sunny is in some ways an American sort of name, but it's because his grandfather called him Sunny Jim. And so Sunny stuck from when he was a little boy, and I really enjoyed that. And he's a bit retro, which I find really attractive, his hair and, you know.
Yeah.
And you always give these descriptions of his clothes, which I really enjoyed as well, I must say. I could see him, very clearly. But one of the things, and I think I can say this because it's quite early in the book, is that he's a bit messed up, and so he's committed to abstinence from sex for possibly 12 months, but certainly 6 months. And so it was so refreshing, because so often in books, the hero and the heroine, or the protagonists, whoever they are, will often jump into bed together like straight away. But this was great because there was this really slow build and a real tension. And I thought that was refreshing and interesting. So can you talk to us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, I loved writing that because, my favorite story to read and to write is a forbidden love story, and when you want something so bad and you can't have it. And so in the case of abstinence, like Hannah, she doesn't do long-term relationships normally, so she was all set to have a one-night stand with Sonny before he goes back to Amsterdam. He's a photographer and he lives in Amsterdam, and he's only over, to see his family for a brief stay. And so she was all set to do that. But then something has happened to him where he goes into therapy, and he basically commits to this, like you say, 6 months of abstinence. He's just like, right, I can't form lasting relationships, so I'm going to just swear myself off sex and just see what happens. And so through mutual friends, they also become friends, and just being but there's always this underlying chemistry, but beneath them, and where Hannah's sort of thinking, right, that's it now, because now we're becoming friends, so nothing's ever going to happen. She's sort of like, from her perspective, she only does one night stands and only does sort of like short flings, but so now she kind of has to write him off from that perspective, because for her own reasons doesn't ever want him to get close to her. But from his perspective, he's now forming the long-lasting relationship that he's always been unable to form, and so he wants more from her, and he's like, come on, where things should be happening. And then so the chemistry sort of keeps building between them, which is so delicious to write. The fact that they like is getting close, and then it starts sort of unveiling itself. Sunny's past starts sort of coming through, and suddenly she cares about him a lot more than than she ever thought that she would, and feels protective of him and wants to help him. And meanwhile he's trying to get to the bottom of what's happened to her, wants to sort of, so that was a really lovely book to write, and I think that's why I feel so close to both of them, because they go through so many ups and downs together and have to sort of navigate their way through it while always having this spark between them, and this sort of, the fact that he kind of is going for a bit more, and she's sort of pulling away a little bit, but then they kiss, and it was great. It was really fun.
It's actually a very satisfying read in that way. It avoids a lot of the cliches, and it's very real. But as I say, it's still got that separation from real life. It's not as gritty, I think, as real life can be in those situations, but there's enough light and dark that really makes it a very satisfying read. So I've got a few things I want to also talk about, but I'm really interested in how you decided on the structure, particularly the point of view, which is Hannah's point of view, but it's in the first person, but quite often she'll say something to Sunny or to another character, and then there's these following paragraphs of inner monologue. And a couple of times early on, as I adjusted, I sort of, hang on, is she talking? And she wasn't talking, she's thinking. So you have this really kind of lovely, slow character reveal that is partially through dialogue, but partially through inner monologue. So I found that fascinating as a technique, perhaps. And it's very hard to do, I think, but you did it really well. Can you talk a bit about how you structure and your technique?
I don't know. I think that's just something I've always done, and maybe it's partly because I feel like you can hear from the way that I talk, I do talk quite quickly, and I think very quickly, like sometimes I'll just be having these sort of, kind of going through my brain, or my husband will talk to me and I'll be like, you've just interrupted a thought, sort of like, so, I'm having he doesn't know that I'm having a conversation inside my head, and so I think that's maybe it, that even though I might be saying something, my thoughts are also jumping ahead. So I write that way too, I sort of know that she'll be kind of also thinking, processing quite quickly as well, and I think I've just always done that. It's not something that I've thought about doing or tried to do. That's just the way that I write. I think I've probably done that since Lucy in the Sky. So yeah, it's the first time I've ever been asked that question. So it's interesting. I've never really thought about it before, but to be able to give
Well,
you a good
it
answer.
actually, yeah, okay, that's a great answer. It works really, really well. Um, the other thing too is that, and you obviously got multiple skills here because the book is very visual. And there's a really, really strong sense of place, which I love in a book. I really love that sense as a reader of being transported to a place that I'm not currently in. And you create that whole sense, like you said, with the river and the pubs and the different things that they're doing. I thought that was just really great. So you've obviously got a strong observational eye. So, is this something that, but you live in Cambridge, so is this book different in that way from your previous books, or do they all have that?
I think I've always been told I write a strong sense of place. I think ever since Lucy in the Sky, when I had this idea about this girl who gets on a plane to fly to Australia, she's, lives in England, flying to Australia for her best friend's wedding, and she gets this text message from her boyfriend's phone that says, "I've slept with your boyfriend 4 times in the last month." And so then she's suddenly told to switch off her phone and she can't find out what's been going on, and is all sort of troubled going down to Australia. And I had this idea, and I remember initially I was planning on setting it in the Adelaide Hills, which is where I grew up, and I really wanted to write this sort of love letter to where I grew up. I did that with my fourth book, Pictures of Lily, just for anyone interested. But I remember my brother saying to me, "I think you should set it in Sydney because that's somewhere that any international readers can really visualize." And
Yeah.
so I'd only been to Sydney once before, so I was actually going over to my mum's. It was her 60th birthday at the time that I was writing the book. And so she flew with me to Sydney for a couple of nights to do a research trip. And I remember her driving and me just sitting in the front seat and just writing. She was so, so good. Like just, she was just gave me this headspace to just sit there and write. And I remember just the journey from the airport and crossing over the Sydney Harbour Bridge and, seeing the white sails of the Opera House and driving through all the suburbs to reach Manly, which is where the character's story was sort of mainly set. And then, like while we were there, I sort of wanted to go and visit all these real places and see where they'd be going out for meals and, just sort of, and just writing all the time, sort of, writing what I saw. And I remember people saying to me when they read that book that they felt like they were there. But I don't like reading book. Well, it sounds awful to say that, but, if I read a book that gets too bogged down in the, visual, it's too descriptive, I find that a bit of a chore. So this is quite immediate, I think, the way that I write. It's sort of because you're inside her head and you're seeing what she's seeing, you're not going to read like a page of prose about, too much description. You're basically on the journey with her, seeing the same things. And so you're in her head. I think the characters, that's why I like writing in the first person present tense, because, you should feel like you're actually inside her head, experiencing the same thing she's experiencing, seeing those same things and so soaking up the atmosphere without being bogged down in too much of it, like it's sort of it's all woven into the story and woven into her thoughts and kind of keeps you sort of moving the story forward while allowing you to kind of like see the world around you.
Right.
But with this book I didn't need to do as much research. Like, I mean, I still did. My parents were actually over last summer and we went to the orchard and I sat there again
Yeah.
with my notepad and sort of wrote about what I was seeing when we were there. And Mum and I went to the Blue Ball Inn and had a glass of prosecco out the front. And
There was a lot of prosecco happening, I must admit. I don't feel readers, that's for sure. Plenty of prosecco. I love the fact that they get drunk, and then wandering down the hill to the river. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I think that Lucy in the Sky, is that the one that has Nathan
Yes.
in it? Okay. So
Great
I
one.
have a question from one of your readers who's obviously a big fan, Shannon. And she says, if you had to marry one of your main characters from all your books, which one would you choose? Which fella holds a special place in your heart? Mine would be Nathan.
Ah, I mean, Nathan was my first because it's been so long since I wrote Lucy in the Sky. I need to read the book again, and
Well, he
and
is
I
very popular, I will say, in reviews. A lot of people love Nathan. Now, he's
yeah,
your Aussie surfer, isn't he?
yes, yeah, he's my
Yeah.
other surfer. Yeah, he'd be a good one. Yeah, I mean, he does definitely have a special place in my heart. And I always thought Ben, Ben who works at the wildlife park and, he sort of looks after koalas and stuff like that, like he was such a lovely character, an older man. And I love Charlie in The Last Piece of My Heart. I mean, he's one of my favorites, I'd have to say.
Yeah.
Charlie just he's got just the right mental attitude and the right sort of heart. Possibly Charlie actually would be
Okay,
the one.
Charlie. And
Yeah.
do are these trays of your husband's, are they? Is he sort of an inspiration?
Yeah,
Or
all of them. All of them come partly from my husband.
you just like to think he is? Okay, and I have a question that's great. I have a question from Charlotte, who says, "Hi Paige, what advice do you have for aspiring authors?"
Hi Charlotte. I would say write what you love. You have to write a book for yourself. Don't try and write it for anyone else. Definitely don't think about what will sell, because you'll get into this horrible sort of minefield about, you'll just be overthinking every single sentence, and it's awful. Almost sort of think that you're not going to get this book published, and you're just going to write a book that you're going to read yourself and just enjoy. And then don't read it. Don't read what you're writing. Just try and push through, because you might be put off by what you've already written, or you'll definitely be slowed down by it. And whereas if you just keep pushing on, then you need to get to the end, because you can't edit nothing. You have to have a book to be able to edit, and you can make it right after the fact, but you just have to keep pushing through and finish it.
I think that's really great advice. That's something that actually Hannah says to Sunny, and I love this. She says, "You'll find your way, I say, believing it." And I thought that was a really wonderful moment in their evolving relationship, that
Yeah.
she actually comes to this point of belief in him, and you expressed it really beautifully.
Oh,
So one of
thank
the really strong and important themes, and you did touch on it a little bit at the beginning, but I wanted to talk about a bit more, is this thing about eye contact. And after reading it, I actually did this with my husband. So that was
you. Oh,
really,
did you do it?
really did. I thought, oh, we've been married all these years, and I don't know that I've ever actually spent for a long time, really time just sitting and looking into his eyes. He has really beautiful eyes. And so it was fascinating. So thank you for that. But
Oh,
um,
cool.
so it's she's so Hannah's not just a sort of optician's assistant. We have that opening, of course, where she first met Sonny, and she has to look at his eyes because she's preparing him to see the optometrist. But also later, as this photographer, he does this wonderful project that I thought, wow, this would be a great project to do in real life, where he ends up photographing the eyes of homeless people as a way of raising public awareness of the fact that a lot of homeless people have vision problems, and that there should be help for them if possible. And you describe it so beautifully. The eye photos that when he does the exhibition, the descriptions are so compelling. They're so convincing and beautiful. And I just, yeah, how did you do that?
Well, I was actually started looking up photographs of like macro shots of people's eyes, and like if you can look online and actually see, macro shots of people's eyes, and, just to get that really, really up close. And then it was just a case of describing what I saw, sort of describing how each one made me feel, because some of them are just, I mean, they don't look like the human eye, it looks like, it could be like a scene from Mars, or, like an underwater sort of scene with like all these sort of wavy fern, reeds and stuff,
Yeah,
it's so unusual, or jellyfish. It's sort of just really, yeah, just Google, macro shots of human eyes, and that was basically what I did, and I'd had the idea already, of being up there close, and about this idea of, we see you, like, or not being able to avoid them, because some of them are quite uncomfortable, and I can imagine, in Sunny's exhibition, they're blown up absolutely huge, that, you don't necessarily want to be that close to the human eye, it sort of felt a bit strange, but in the case of homeless people, where so many people look away, it was kind of supposed to make people feel potentially, a little bit uncomfortable, but also fascinated, to be able to be that close to someone. And then, of course, there's a story of the homeless person, in tiny little lettering all around the outside of the eye.
yeah, I love that. Yeah,
That
with
was
their
my
story.
husband's idea. Like I talk about my ideas so much to my husband, like he's so involved, behind the scenes in, in the stories and stuff. He's the only person I really talk to about it, apart from my editor. I have a
Yeah,
fantastic editor who I've been with, for all these years. Suzanne Babineau, she was Jackie Collins' editor. She's been in the business for 30, 40 years. In publishing for a really
wow.
long time, and so I always talk through the idea with her, and she's great. She'll sort of bounce back different ideas and things too. But then my husband is my sort of sounding board for everything, so he often kind of comes up with other little sort of suggestions, and he takes photographs himself, so he can help me with that side of it.
It's absolutely fantastic. Well, I love that because there is this consistent theme of things to do with eyes, eye contact, really seeing people, not just the homeless, but among the characters. And it's not just your main characters that evolve, it's also your secondary characters who have to come to, a new place together as well. I thought that was really, really well done. And of course, you've got a wonderful dog. And I mean, I love dogs in books. I think they're just great. So tell us a little bit about Bertie.
Oh, Bertie, bless. So the friends that I've dedicated this book to, Georgie and Lewis, they've got a dog, a black Labrador called Berry, and I've known Berry and Georgie and Lewis for years now, So she's just a lovely sort of character, and I was definitely inspired by her. But hilariously, like we've now got a dog of our own. She's not a black Labrador, but she's a sort of when you see her next to Berry, she's so tiny. Like she's still a puppy. She's only 4 months old, but she's a mixed breed, but she looks to me a little bit like a mini black Labrador. She's really cute. So we've been taking her canoeing, and she jumped in off the river, jumped in off the canoe on Saturday into the water, and just decided she would go for a swim. We're like, okay, we'll just
in the book.
Yeah. The difference is that she's little, so you can fish her out really easily, whereas Bertie's like this giant Labrador, so Hannah gets very wet at one point.
So you've written 14 books. This is the minute I saw you was your 14th book, but you've actually written across a few genres, because you've written novels, general fiction. People tend to call them women's fictions or chick lit. I actually just think they're novels. It's fiction. Yeah. So okay, you can call that if you want to. We don't have men's fiction.
No. Yeah, it's true. I would say not that many men do read my books, though. I would say it's mostly women that read them.
Well, it's mostly women who read, I think. So that's good. But and you've also written short stories. So you've written women's fiction, young adult, and short stories. Is it a different writing process from one genre?
No, I didn't find, like, these are my. So I ended up, I wrote like sequels to some of my books.
Yeah.
And then eventually had enough to actually publish in a paperback. I had so many readers asking for these ebooks to be published in print, because they didn't want to read on the. And so eventually, we had enough to sort of put in a proper paperback. So that's what that is. And then these are my young adult. And again, so this is a spin-off of my second and fifth book, Johnny Be Good and Baby Be Mine, and that was about.
This is the rock star.
And the door. I've always sort of like mixed it up a little bit. Like I still write about very ordinary women, and certainly in the case of them, the last few have been just ordinary women, but certainly earlier on, I think maybe my Heat influence, working at a celebrity magazine. I love the idea of sort of like having a. Like my second book was about a rock star. My sixth book was about a movie star. And my third book was about a racing driver, so they've sort of also had a bit of a glitz and glamour in some of them too. Anyway, Johnny Be Good is my second book, about this girl who goes to work for an international rock star, and sort of thrown into this very ordinary girl, very extraordinary circumstances. And I decided when my kids went back to school, I remember my friend saying to me, "You write your books so quickly, why don't you do 2 a year?" And she said, you should write, what about young adult? And I'd already had this idea for writing about Johnny's daughter, the idea of him sort of having had a relationship with one of his groupies, and having this daughter that he never knew existed. And so basically, when she said that to me, I thought, well, because I write my books in real time, I wouldn't have been able to write that book until the girl was in her 20s, because I normally write about heroines who are in their 20s, 30s. But then it worked that I could have a sort of 15-year-old protagonist. And so I thought, well, I'll write a book series about, his daughter, this very, very ordinary girl who does not know that her dad is a world famous rock star. And then she discovers the truth, and, she's very troubled. Her mother died 6 months ago. And so she feels very, she's sort of all over the place really with, bad crowd, running with a bad crowd and stuff. And so that was really, really fun to write. And the great thing about those books, like I wrote them even quicker than, than 3 months, was because I was already so familiar with their settings. You spend so much time in the early stages of the book, having to sort of build the settings and know, like imagine everything and research everything. Whereas in this case, I knew where Johnny lived. I know what his house is like in the LA Hills, and the, Beverly Hills. And so then it was, and also, Jessie, she grows up in Maidenhead, which is where I went to school when I was younger. And so, I was already familiar with that side of it. And so it was great. I already had the setting ready to go, and then just had to be inside of the head of a 15-year-old, which I didn't feel any different to being in. I think once you know who the character is, and you know what the journey is, you're just inside the head, and you're just, so for me, like those books are just, my readers should enjoy them just as much as they enjoy my adult books, because I enjoyed writing them just as much as I enjoyed writing my adult books, and writing that first is even more passionate, and yeah, it's fun.
So there's 3 young adult books, and they're the spin-off from Johnny Be Good. So Johnny Be Good, the one about the rock star, and then what are the 3 young adult ones called? Have you got them there?
Yeah. So it's The Accidental Life of Jessie Jefferson.
Lovely.
That's the first one. The second one is called I Knew You Were Trouble.
Great title.
She has her very own, kind of, she's basically sort of, this girl is torn between an ordinary boy and this sort of, son of a rock star who's also in a rock band, and, bit of a bad boy. So she's kind of also has her own little bit of a love triangle going on. And then the final one is all about the hype.
Fantastic.
All Hype is the band of this boy. This boy's got this band called All Hype, and she ends up going and singing for his band, and just sort of becoming a little mini rock star herself. So it was so much fun to write. Like, I absolutely loved reading her story. I've had so many readers write to me lately asking for another one, so yeah, it's just finding the time.
Well, you sound like you don't have any trouble actually, writing them and getting them written. So, your publisher's dream, really. We do have a question, this time from Trish. Do you have a favourite place that you have visited while researching a book?
I think, it's a tricky one, that, because some of my favourite places are places that I went to on family holidays and then wrote about afterwards. So Cornwall, I absolutely loved. I ended up writing about it in 2 books, and the second time was book research. So it was, I went, the last piece of my heart, I basically went on family holiday in our camper van to Padstow in Cornwall, and had a fantastic week there. And then as we were driving out of the campsite, I was like, this is where Bridget has to come to write her story. I planned on setting it a little bit closer to home, and then I thought this would work brilliantly. She has to come and live in a camper van. Can write about what it's like living in a camper van for someone who like her, who usually takes 2 suitcases on holiday with her. To have to cram everything in, and walking up the hill to drink mini bottles of prosecco and stuff. That she puts in her little fridge, and so that was really, really fun. And then I loved Cornwall so much, I wanted to go back. So I went back for the 5 years from now, which is set on the River Helford in Cornwall, and we went and stayed in a cottage that very much is the cottage that features in 5 years from now. You can go and actually stay there and visit there, and watching the river, the tidal river going in and out, and setting it all around, around the sort of Cornish, childhood. So that was really lovely. And then in the last piece of my heart, we also had just been to Thailand on a family holiday with my parents and my brother and his family. And that was like one of the most amazing places I'd ever been. This hotel was just out of the world, out of this world. It was just so stunning, like the sunsets and the ocean, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And so I wrote about that in the last piece of my heart as well. So I'd say the one place I really want to go back to is Thailand, out of everywhere else. That's
Great
where
country.
Yeah.
Is that the one where the author has died, Nicole? Is it?
Yes.
And
yeah. So basically, Charlie is the my future husband. Charlie has a baby, and his wife, she died of a brain aneurysm when she had only started writing the sequel to a best-selling book. So she'd written this book, which had gone on to become a huge bestseller, and started writing the sequel to it. And basically Bridget is trying to write her own book, which is not really going anywhere. She has this relationship blog that she sort of writes about and stuff, and no one really cares that much. And but her agent, contacts her and says, look, this editor loves the way that you write. She wants you to write the sequel to, to finish writing
Finish
this.
the
She goes
manuscript.
down
Yeah.
to Cornwall, which is where Charlie lives, and to spend like 3 months of summer sort of living in this, campsite and going to his house to go through all of the diaries and, everything that, Nicole, his wife, had left behind, and gradually gets to know him and, his baby daughter, and yeah, so it brings life and laugh. She brings a lot of laughter back into his life because, he's sort of just ticking along, sort of struggling and everything, and she's suddenly this crazy girl who's suddenly injected into his life, and has to try and get to the bottom of what his wife was thinking and doing when she wrote this book. That was an interesting one to write. Yeah, it was tricky because you're weaving in her story as well as Bridget's story, and there were lots of
Yeah.
different layers to it.
It's a
Um,
great premise, actually. I think that's a really great premise. And that actually leads me to wonder, out of these 14 books that you've written, obviously you've said, you've just loved writing the young adult books, but have any of them been particularly hard? What's been your toughest book to write?
I remember going through a bit of a wobble with 13 Weddings. Like, I mean, because I don't leave myself enough time to write my books before my deadline, I can't be afforded to have writer's block. I
Yeah.
have to get through it. But I do remember having about a week of writer's block with 13 Weddings, which felt like forever because I think I was maybe halfway into the book and I only had like about 3 weeks before my deadline. And so I had so much to write. I did meet the deadline. Like once I got through that writer's block, I was just like, bam, I just knew what was happening. I knew what was going to, where the characters needed to go. And, often it might be something to do with a backstory or something that had happened to them, which you don't really fully understand until later. And that book involved a bit of editing to go back and get that backstory woven in through the rest of the book. But, yeah, I think probably 13 Weddings was just tricky for that reason. I wasn't fully connected to the backstory until I was
So do you
well.
have any particular methodology or any sort of ways of breaking through those tricky moments where you do find that something's not quite right and you're blocked, or and you can't afford to be blocked? So what do you do? Do you,
So I think the most important thing is to not be too scared, and because that panic will just make you feel worse. And actually, it's to do the complete opposite of what you might think, which is instead of sitting there and staring at a computer and only writing a few lines and feeling like you want to cry. um, and I remember this vividly. My husband had taken the kids into London, and it was coming up towards Christmas, and the whole point was he was trying to sort of give
give me
me a
some
little bit
space.
of extra time on the weekends to write. And I just remember just like writing a paragraph that day and just sobbing. I was so upset that I'd wasted a family day when I could have gone with the kids into London and and just had a lovely day, and I hadn't been productive at all, and it just felt, it was awful. But actually, the thing that you need to do more than anything is to take a break from the writing. Go and watch a movie. I go for a lot of walks and I listen to music as I'm walking, and and it needs to be, often, it'll be in the last 5 minutes that my characters start talking to me. But you need enough headspace to just be able to think about anything and not necessarily focus on the book, but just let your mind wander, and then eventually, it starts sort of coming back. They start talking again, and yeah, so it's just about giving yourself space. But like I say, even going to see a movie, whereas you wouldn't normally give yourself that time to do that.
Yeah.
But I read a quote somewhere: "Beauty inspires beauty," and the secret to unlocking writer's block is to read, and or read a book, And so I'm not scared of reading anymore. I used to be, when I first started writing, I thought if I read, I'm just going to think I'm rubbish and they're amazing, and I can't do this. And so I stopped reading. I certainly didn't read my genre. I started reading fantasy books and Twilight and stuff like that. Which was fantastic because it's still a love story. But now I love reading. Now if I actually need some inspiration, I'll read somebody else's book, and if anything, it just encourages me to do better. Encourages me to, think a little bit harder on this sentence or that sentence and find a better way of saying it. And yeah, so don't be
That's
put off by reading.
Yeah. Certainly, I find reading gives permission because you see what other people are doing, and it isn't necessarily what you're doing, but it lets you know, oh, okay, that worked for them, or they did this, or well, maybe I can try what I'm doing. Doesn't
Yeah.
do the same as everybody else.
But also sometimes it's just about a turn of phrase, like I use certain turns of phrase in my books and I'm like feeling like I'm massively overusing them. And then you'll read like a different way of saying the same sort of thing, like butterflies, for
Yeah.
example, a different way
Yeah.
of,
Oh,
just
I
sort of
noticed that.
describing that.
You found a lot of different ways with the butterflies. I was really delighted. And the little mini acrobat. I thought the
Yeah.
mini acrobat was great. Yeah.
Well, that was just me. That wasn't somewhere I'd
The
read.
readers will have to read the
You know,
book to get
it encourages you to. It encourages you to think about. You know, like someone else might have said something like similar, and you know that kind of encourages you to think of your own way of saying it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's
great
exactly right.
inspiration.
Finding those ways to express those hard emotions, definitely. We do have a question, and a really good question from, I don't know if I'm going to say her name correctly, but Kaniana. Do you write in chronological order or as the scenes come to you?
I almost always write in chronological order because I find that there's always some like major key scene, you know, that's going to happen towards the end of the book. You know, usually it's when they finally get together, you know, but there's always something that I'm really looking forward to, and that drives me, you know, it sort of drives me to that point. And so when I get to that point, you know, those are the times when I'm my most prolific, and that's often usually, you know, there's like one weekend approaching my deadline when my husband takes the kids up north to go and see grandparents, and that is the weekend that when it's just me and I'm just focused, and that I quite often write 20,000 words, you know, just in that weekend alone, you know, just because I'm, you know, just so focused on the story, and it will be that key scene, you know, that I've been looking forward to writing so much so I can't type fast enough. So yeah, always chronological order for me. But I don't necessarily think that's right for other people, you know. And sometimes I know some of my advice is if you're suffering with writer's block, just try and end the scene that you're working on as quickly as possible. You can always fill it out later, but just jump to the next thing that you're excited about writing just to help you get writing again. Because again, like I say, you know, you can leave blanks. And I did do that in a book just recently. I was suddenly finding myself under so much pressure. It was If You Could Go Anywhere, and I found that hard to get into. And I think because my head was still so much with 5 years from now. Like that book really broke me. You know, that was a really heartbreaking book to write, and I couldn't kind of get my head into writing the next one for some time. And so when I came to write it, and there was a lot of research involved in it as well, so I was getting myself really bogged down in the research. And but I do sort of remember. God, I can't remember where I was going at this point. What were we talking about again? Getting bogged down in the.
We were talking about no, you were getting bogged down in the research. I've completely no, I was so fascinated by what you were saying about 5 years from now, and thinking, gosh, I've got to read that book because obviously it was incredibly hard to write.
It was hard, but
the question was about chronological order, and
yes,
you were talking.
that's right. Yeah. So basically, with If You Could Go Anywhere, I was, you know, fast approaching my deadline.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just get to this. I wanted to get the main character arcs through their journey, but there were so many other little loose ends to tie up to. And I thought, you know what? I'll leave those loose ends until after I finish the book. And so I just pushed her forward and left blanks. You know, I just actually wrote blah. And I thought I'll fill in that party scene later. You know, I'll fill in that conversation later and just sort of get to the end. And it was so fantastic to get to the end. I was so on top of the moon, you know, to be able to, you know, to get to the end, and then it's so much easier then once your mind's cleared because you know that the characters are done to then fill in the blanks. So I think that's a really good tip too. You know, just follow the main character's arc, and then you can fill in the other bits later.
But it's absolutely fascinating talking to you and hearing these things, because I think one of the things that comes out of it is that every author has a different way of working, and that you can't. My experience now and talking to you sort of confirms it, is that, you know, your way works for you, but it doesn't necessarily go to work for other people. So for an aspiring author, don't try and think that you have to work the way Paige Toon works. You have to figure out what works for you as an individual author, I think. You know, you're enormously successful, and deservedly so. You're obviously, you know, an incredibly disciplined author, a great observer of character and of place. And, you know, you've got 1.5 million sales, which is just phenomenal. But what is it you think that makes your novels so popular?
I would say from reader feedback and, you know, and online reviews and stuff, like my amazon.co.uk reviews are just my, you know, I'm always going there, you know, just to have this. It's, you know, one of my favorite places to visit, you know, because the readers are, all of the books are either a 4.5 or 5-star rating, you know, average. And from reading those sort of reviews, I think it's that they feel like they're inside the heroine's head. I think they feel like they're experiencing what she's, you know, experiencing. And I've got a great editor, Suzanne, who, like I say, was Jackie Collins's editor, and she always cuts out any dead wood, and I listen to her. If there's, she's like, I remember with Lucy in the Sky, we cut 10,000 words of Lucy in the Sky, which is my very first book, but she was just like, we've heard this before, we don't need this scene, like you can jump forward. And now we don't cut anywhere near that amount, because I know what I'm doing a lot more. But she was still occasionally just cross out a paragraph and say, you've said this, and so I think she helps keep my books fast paced. Something will always be happening just around the corner, and so you'll never get bogged down in a scene. So they're just a sort of, I think they're like, a bit like watching a movie. They're easy to be immersed in, because
very much so.
they're not too hard. They're not hard. I don't sit there and write pages and pages of prose or anything like that. They're quite, like I say, I think fast paced like a film. So you should sort of feel like they're as easy to read as watching a film and be inside this sort of character, inside this little sort of film that's going on. That's how it feels like to me when I'm writing them. It feels like a little film.
If you had to choose one of your books to be made into a film, which one would you choose?
Oh, this probably changes every time I get asked this question. But I'd love to see Johnny Be Good as like a Netflix series, because that's got somewhere to go, like Johnny, then it goes on to Baby Be Mine, which is a sequel, which I made my poor readers wait 3 years for. And then of course the Jessie series, like that is sort of, I can see that as a whole, that would be such a glamorous kind of fun series to watch, this sort of rock star girl, I think that'd be great fun.
Maybe that's on the horizon, you never know. So speaking of on the horizon, what's next for Paige Toon?
Well, next I have to write my next book. So at the moment I'm just thinking about it. I've had this idea this was supposed to be the idea that I wrote instead of The Minute I Saw You. And so I've been thinking about it for longer than normal. And so it feels really, really clear inside my head, and I'm really excited about these characters, And this is about a girl whose parents were foster carers. And so growing up, she used to have to share a house with these sort of troubled teenagers. And one of these teenagers, she forms a special bond with, and he's been separated from his young sister. His young sister has been put up for adoption, and he didn't even get to say goodbye. And this is something that actually happens. It's so heartbreaking. And so he wants to find out, what's happened to her, and she's very protective of him. And then there's another sort of another part of their triangle who's Theo, and he's this boy of a sort of local wealthy landowner, and he's been away at boarding school, but suddenly he's going to the local school. He's getting a bit picked on, and his life is not all, it's not a bed of roses the way that you might think it is, even though he seems to come from a privileged background. And so it's the story of the three of them, and it's told between then when they were teenagers and now when they're in their early 30s. And there's a big old twist in this one, like there's something that sort of happens in this one, which I won't give anything else away, but this sort of story of the three of them,
Do we have a title for that one yet?
I've got a sort of a tentative title, but whether or not it ends up being, but it's called at the moment just the working title, which I'm not, like I say, it might not end up being this, but it's Half a Life Ago is what I'm sort of potentially thinking. Half a Life Ago, I think that was it, because it's then and now, it's sort of basically exactly sort of 15 years earlier. The story is told between the two, or it might be 12 years. I haven't fully decided on their ages yet, but it's going to be sort of 16, 17, and sort of 32, sort of 34 sort of age.
And is there a book that you feel, we're running out of time, sadly, in fact, oh gosh, it's 8:30, a book that you feel, A, is your favourite, and B, is there a book that you feel took you to a new level?
Or I think the one we fell in love with probably took me to a new level, because that was like, that does have a twist.
Again? Which one?
The one we fell in love with, which is this one, and that got chosen for like a big big sort of UK book club. Zoella, she's a sort of and I think there's a big twist in that one, and I think that was probably one of the first times I'd written like a full twist, and to pull that off, to get that the reaction from the readers that I wanted was it was tricky. And there was because that's also told with some flashbacks to when they're 18. It's about these triplet girls, identical triplets, and when they're 17, this gorgeous boy moves in next door, and the one who sees him first is the one who ends up with him, but she's not necessarily the one that he should have been with. And so it's sort of this love story about, the boy next door, and then it's told in their late 20s when this same girl is getting married to him. But I had to write like I say, there's a big old twist in that one.
Don't tell us. I'm sure it's going to have holds on the library. As soon as we get off, everyone will jump on the library website and start putting holds on all your books, which will be great. I'm looking forward to reading a lot more of them. Well, I suppose we have to finish, but I could talk to you for hours, Paige.
It's so nice talking to you. This has been my favourite one so far. Up to this point, I've had to just talk at my computer. So it's actually so nice to have a conversation with someone.
Well, it's really good, isn't it? Well, we've had lots of participants, and everyone's, I think, really enjoyed it. It's been just splendid. So thank you, Paige, for a great discussion tonight. People, you can purchase The Minute I Saw You at any of your local bookstores or through any online bookstore, of course. So please do that. And of course, there are also copies available to borrow from the Geelong Regional Libraries. We have an amazing library. So next time you come to Australia, Paige, you should try to come to Geelong, because we have many library branches, and we have the most beautiful main library, the Dome, which is just a fabulous space. And you could come and talk live at the high ground.
I love that.
Wurdirang, which is the high ground and has amazing views over Corio Bay. So just put that on your agenda once COVID, and you can fly again. So we can borrow Paige Toon's books from the Geelong Regional Library website in hard copy and ebook. The latest book will be available from the 12th of August in ebook format. And we're thrilled to remind everybody that our libraries have now reopened for reduced opening hours due to COVID. So just jump on the website and you'll get the opening hours, but you can pop in and pick up your holds. And don't forget to check out the library's Facebook page for more upcoming events, including our true crime panel discussion called Wayward Women in Historical Crime, as opposed to historical crime. So that'll be good. And it's featuring terrific authors Tara Mitchell, Loretta Smith, Tanya Bretherton, and Samantha Battams. And that's happening next Wednesday night. So jump on, you can book online, it's free to participate. So let's support all of our authors, and near and far. And Paige, you qualify as both a British and an Australian author. So get out there and read your books. And on behalf of the library, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and good night.
Thank you. Thanks from me too. I just really appreciate everyone who joined in, and thank you so much, Jen. That was a really great chat. I really appreciate it.
I had a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you.